Yeah, I'm wearing this sweater again, the Golden Age Two-Face sweater. Anyway, hello, I'm Mr. Rogues. Welcome to this new video of mine. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about my ideas for a Flash movie trilogy. Now, this movie trilogy is going to completely ignore all the stuff we've actually gotten with the Flash on the big screen. All that Ezra Miller stuff, let's just pretend that's never happened. And I'm just going fresh into it with this idea for a Flash movie trilogy. Now let's start off with the first movie, simply titled The Flash, probably. Now this first Flash movie would quickly go into the origins of the Flash, Barry Allen. We would not spend a whole lot of time on it, and it would happen very early in the movie. Basically, Barry is a police scientist, and he is always in the lab doing boring stuff in his opinion, and he longs to be out on the streets and actually stopping criminals. He longs for action, and he greatly admires the Flash, the old Flash, Jake Garrick, who used to be the city's protector a couple of decades ago maybe. And he retired, and Barry is a big fan of him and dreams that he could be a superhero and be out in the street stopping crime instead of just hanging out in the lab. And then of course the accident happens and gives him powers, and now his dream has come true. He's now a superhero and he is out in the streets fighting crime. And he dubs himself, obviously, the Flash after his old hero, and that makes a costume that homages Jay Garrick's old costume. Meanwhile, there's a notorious criminal in town, Mark Martin, whom Barry has been investigating the case of, trying to capture him. And he also gets powers somehow and becomes a weather wizard. I don't really know if it's the same accident that gives Barry his powers that also gives Mark his powers. I haven't quite figured that out yet. Anyway, he becomes a weather wizard and he becomes a Flash. And so now they are actually physically fighting out in the streets as superpowered people, as opposed to a police scientist trying to find evidence to get this regular criminal. Now there's superhero versus supervillain. Meanwhile, there's this old, retired supervillain in town as well, who used to tangle with Jay Garrick back when he was the Flash decades ago, or however long ago it is. And this villain is the Shade. Yes, the Shade is also in the movie. And he was Jay Garrick's arch nemesis. And he still longs back to the old days of tangling with the Flash out in the streets. He viewed the whole thing as a fun game. He wasn't evil. And he also isn't an immortal man like he is nowadays in the comics. I'm more going so with the old classic The Shade, who's a thief who uses a cane that can manipulate shadows. But in character, he more so resembles the modern Shade in that he's kinda morally ambiguous. He's not an evil villain, and he just kinda wants to have fun. He's not really out to hurt people. And so he sees what's going on in town now with this new Flash and this new supervillain Weather Wizard, and he goes like, wow, this seems like fun. It's just like the old days. I wanna join in too. And so he does. And he contacts Weather Wizard and they team up. He takes the Weather Wizard under his wing and sort of becomes his supervillain mentor, teaches him the tricks of the trade, so to speak. However, eventually it becomes quite apparent to the Shade that this Mark Martin dude is kinda he's a lot more violent and evil than he ever used to be. This guy is a really unhinged criminal. He's not really in it for the fun. He has delusions of grandeur, and he eventually wants to basically take over the entire city and declare himself a god. He's a really narcissistic fella, and when he gets these powers to control the weather, he really gets big in the head and starts seeing himself as a god. And this is also when he starts to dress up in a really outlandish costume, because he really wants to look like a god, not just a regular man. Before that, he would just wear regular clothes. And so the Weather Wizard just becomes too much for the Shade to handle, and he realizes his mistake, that this guy is way too dangerous and he has to actually be stopped. This is not fun anymore. People are actually dying. This guy is insane. So he actually contacts the Flash and teams up with the Flash instead to stop the Weather Wizard. Meanwhile, of course, Jay Garrick returns and comes out of his retirement to help Barry and mentor him. So we have Garrick mentoring Barry and the Shade mentoring the Weather Wizard. But in the end, all three of them, the Shade, Barry and Jay, has to team up to stop the Weather Wizard. And ultimately, the point of the movie is that both Barry and the Shade learns that this whole superhero supervillain thing isn't a game, it's serious. You shouldn't see it as something fun, as they both have always been doing. Barry always just longed of becoming a superhero because it seemed like fun, more fun than being in the lab. And the Shade has always seen crime as a fun game. But now they've both learned that it's not. And that's their character arc in the movie. They both have the same character arc. Now let's move to the second movie. The second movie would feature the Rogues as the villains. And the Rogues in this version would be Captain Cold, Mirror Master, the Trickster and the Golden Glider. I'm keeping it down to just 4 to make it a bit simpler, because if you have too many characters in a movie, it's gonna easily end up a big mess. Now by this movie, Barry has learned from the previous movie that you shouldn't take this crime fighting lightly. It's very serious and dangerous, and so he's kind of overreacting to the whole thing. He's being overly cautious, because he would also introduce Kid Flash in this movie, Iris West's nephew or whatever he is, I forget. And Iris would of course also be in the first movie. She would be the love interest of Barry, and in this movie you introduce her nephew, Wally West. And of course Wally also has an accident that gives him lightning speed. I mean, it's a bit silly, I know, we have all these characters ending up in accidents and getting super speed. But that's how it is in the comics. You know, what are you gonna do? Those are the origins of the characters in the source material. You can't really do anything about that. It is what it is. And this would be in the movie Wally's first visit to Central City. He's never been to the city before, but he's of course heard of the Flash, and he's a big fan of the hero, and he desperately wants to meet him. And he also meets Barry, of course, early on in the movie, and doesn't really like him very much. He finds him very boring. But then he finds out that Barry and the Flash are one and the same, maybe at the same time as he gets his powers, perhaps, I'm not really sure. And he desperately now wants to become Barry's sidekick. He wants to be Kid Flash, but Barry's like, no, heck no. This is not a game, as he learned in the previous movie. This is not a fun game. This is very dangerous, very, very serious. I can't drag anyone else into this. I have to do it all myself. He's even refusing help from Jay now. He's really convincing Jay to stay retired. He's too old. You can't do this anymore. It's way too dangerous. So he's learned his lesson a little bit too hard. He's taking it too seriously now. And meanwhile, we have all these criminals in town who are fed up with the Flash always messing up their business. So we follow Leonard Snart committing some kind of crime and getting caught by the Flash and then being sent to prison. And in prison, he meets some old chums, James Jesse and Sam Scudder. And these two have also been caught by the Flash and are in prison because of him. And so they all hate the freaking Flash. And together in prison, they come to the conclusion that they gotta get rid of the Flash. But how do you get rid of a guy with superpowers when they don't have any superpowers? They're just regular dudes. Well, they gotta give themselves superpowers. And so they escape from prison, and somehow they find out about something. I haven't really figured this out yet, but there's somewhere where there are these fantastical gadgets being held. I've tried to figure out different ideas, like maybe there's some kind of a government military lab or something outside Central City that they break into and steal these gadgets, or maybe there's some kind of World's Fair, or maybe there's some kind of big science expedition coming to Central City that are going to exhibit these fantastical gadgets. I haven't really figured it out yet, but it's of course the cold gun, the airwalking shoes, and some kind of device that can manipulate reflective surfaces. Oh, of course, and also some kind of gadget for the Golden Glider. The Golden Glider, Lisa Snart, is also a criminal and Leonard's sister, and she's not in prison. After they escape from prison, they first go to Lisa and hide out in her place and drag her into this whole thing too. And there's some kind of fourth gadget for her as well, and I haven't really figured out what it's gonna be. It's not gonna be the shoes that she has in the comics, the skis, because that's kind of, I don't like those. I've never liked that gimmick, and it's too similar to the Trickster's airwalking shoes. We can't have two shoe gimmicks, you know, it's gotta be something else. But also not the gold gun from the TV show that she uses, the gun that shoots gold or whatever the heck it was. Not that. It's gonna be something completely different, something new, but I haven't figured out what yet. But I do really want to use Lisa in the movie as part of the Rogues, because it is very fitting that she is Leonard's sister, because the Rogues are like a family. They become like a family in the movie. And she is literal family. And also you need a woman on the team. You can't just all be dudes, you know, you gotta have some variety. And so these criminals have now gotten these gadgets, and James Jesse is gonna be portrayed as the sort of comedic relief of the team, I guess. He's gonna be the funny, snarky, playful one on the team, and he's the one who comes up with all of these supervillain identities and costumes and all that. He starts calling himself the Trickster and makes himself a costume, and it's gonna be a really goofy one, just like in the comics, with the blue cape and the domino mask and the striped outfit with like bright yellow or orange and blue on it. It's gonna be like that because he really likes this whole supervillain, superhero thing. He's really into that. So he starts doing that, and he dubs Leonard Captain Cold and Sam the Mirror Master and Lisa the Golden Glider, and he's the one who comes up with all of that. The other ones think it's kinda corny, and they're like, no dude, just no. Except for Leonard, who eventually grows to kinda like it. He's kinda like, this Captain Cold thing is actually kinda cool. So he eventually starts to embrace it. Anyway, as the Rogues, together they attack the Flash with their gadgets, and they beat him. They defeat the Flash, and they then basically just kinda take over the city. They humiliate the police force, they humiliate all the other criminals in town, they take over the entire criminal underworld. They just kind of do whatever they want, and they're not gonna be portrayed as really evil people like the Weather Wizard in the first movie. Instead, they're gonna be more interested in just being able to do what they want and humiliating all of their old enemies and stuff like that. Sort of flaunting their new powers and stuff, instead of trying to declare themselves a god and murdering tons of people like the Wizard did. So they do have that code of honor from the comics, in the sense that they are not merciless killers. And Captain Cold especially would be like this. His sister would actually be a bit more nasty, and he would have to kind of rein her in, like, stop Lisa, we don't do that. And also Mirror Master would be a bit like this, and I imagine that Lisa and Sam would kind of have a romance going on, and so Lisa would kind of spur Sam into being more sinister. And so Captain Cold kind of have to keep them in check to not get them not to do all this evil stuff. And so what happens, right? The Rogues have kind of taken over the city, and the Flash is defeated, and I guess a prisoner of the Rogues somehow. And maybe he's frozen in a block of ice with Captain Cold's cold gun. And so what happens? Well, Wally becomes Kid Flash. He has to do it to save his hero and save the day. And he does it, of course, together with Jay Garrick. Jay Garrett returns against Barry's wishes, and he sort of tutors Wally a bit and teaches him some stuff, and Wally gets a costume somehow, you know, a little mini costume, I don't know really the details. And so together they save Barry, and then Barry realizes he's gone up against this family of villains, and he was saved by his sort of family of heroes, and he realizes that you can't do this alone. Like, you need a family, you need friends. He got defeated by a group of people because he was alone and had no one by his side. So he realizes that he has to have these sidekicks enabled to defeat the villains. So together they do that, obviously. They team up, the Flash and Kid Flash team up and defeat the Rogues together as a team, as a sort of family. It's about family, and that's what makes it so important. Yeah, maybe a little bit corny, I guess, but I think it fits the characters, and I think it fits as an arc for the Flash, considering what he went through in the previous movie. He's been overreacting and freezing everyone out and wanting to take all the responsibilities on himself because he doesn't want to get anyone else hurt in what he kind of considers his crusade. But he realizes that it isn't his crusade. It's not all up to him, and he can't do it all on his own. He needs help, and he has to accept this help. And yeah, that's the second movie of the trilogy. Now let's get to the final movie. The final movie would feature Reverse Flash as the villain, Eobard Thawne. This movie takes place a few years after the second movie, so now Barry has been the Flash for several years, and he's an old veteran now, and Jay Garrick is truly retired by now, and Wally West has grown up and is, I don't know, maybe 19 or 20 years old, and he's not really Kid Flash anymore. He still is, he has that mantle, but he's really getting too old to be Kid Flash now. And Barry is getting kinda tired of the whole game, and he sees how Jay Garrick is doing well in retirement, and he kinda wishes that he could go and retire, or at least semi-retire and hand over the reins to someone else, and just, every now and then come in and help out, just like Jay used to do for him. Meanwhile, we have Eobard, who is a massive Flash fan from the future, just like in the comics, and finds a way to artificially give himself super speed and travel back in time to meet his great idol. And I guess he has an inverted Flash costume that's yellow for some reason. Haven't really figured it out yet. Or maybe it becomes inverted later, I'm not really sure. Anyway, so they meet, and Eobard's dream has basically come true. He teams up with the Flash, and together they stop some crime. Maybe the Rogues again. They're at it again, and they stop them together. And it's just, he's all fawning over his hero, and he's doing what he's always wanted to do. And so Barry, he starts seeing this guy as, maybe he can be my replacement. Maybe he can take over as the new champion of Central City. But of course, it turns out that Eobard is kinda cuckoo bonkers crazy. He is not all up there. He has a few screws loose. It becomes apparent to Barry that this Eobard is kind of unhinged. He's too violent against the criminals. He's too rough and harsh. Maybe he even kills some criminal on purpose, which of course Barry never does. But Barry had already led on to Eobard that he kinda wanted him to become his replacement, and of course he got super excited about that. But then Barry is forced to kinda reject him and basically tell him to no, go back to the future please. We can't have you here, it's not gonna work out. You're too violent, dude. And Eobard doesn't take it very well. So instead of going back to the future, he sends Barry to the future. He feels that he's been betrayed by his hero. His hero wasn't as great as he thought in his mind. You should never meet your heroes. And so he basically now takes over as the Flash of Central City in our time, while Barry is stuck in the future. And this would be very interesting, of course, because now the movie truly becomes a science fiction movie, because we get scenes with Barry in the future. He's stuck in the future, and it's gonna be really futuristic, kinda Blade Runner-esque, but brighter, not so dark maybe. And he's trying to find a way to get back to his time, and maybe he has trouble with the future authorities, perhaps. Maybe Eobard was already in trouble with the authorities in the future, and they mistake Barry for Eobard because they both have super speed. And I guess perhaps Eobard also operated on his face to look like Barry. Maybe he did that as well, I haven't quite decided yet. Maybe that's a bit too extreme, too psychotic. But anyway, they mistake Barry for Eobard. And so meanwhile, he has to evade the future authorities and all their futuristic gadgets and vehicles, while he's also trying to get back to our time. And of course, in our time, Eobard is going completely amok. He beats up Kid Flash, obviously, and I'm kinda debating what I should do with Jay. Maybe Jay comes back to try and help Wally to stop this crazy Flash, but Eobard either ends up beating him up really bad, or he even ends up killing Jay. I haven't really decided what happens to Jay, or maybe he should just stay happy in retirement. I'm not really clear on that yet. I mean, in one way it would be kind of fitting to kill off Jay in the final movie of the trilogy, you know, the old original Flash. And having gotten rid of Wally West, Eobard then uses his powers to essentially take over the city. He becomes this sort of one-man extremist police force who rules the city with an iron fist and will not allow any crime. He stops all crime with extreme force. And one idea I have that I'm not quite settled on yet is that the rogues team up to try and save Central City for once from this new crazy Flash, but they end up failing and Eobard actually kills them all. He kills the rogues. But this is something I'm not settled on yet. Maybe I would do that or maybe not, I'm not quite sure. Maybe he just incapacitates them and maybe kills one or two of them. Not really quite sure on that. But I do like the idea of the rogues returning for this movie and sort of being heroes instead of villains as they were in the previous movie and trying to stop Eobard. Of course, eventually Barry returns and has a one-on-one with Eobard and, you know, eventually wins. And Eobard is sent back to the future and taken into custody by the futuristic authorities. And Barry has of course realized his horrible mistake of planning to hand over the reins to this madman. So he decides to hand over the reins to the guy who was there all along and a guy he can really trust and who he really knows, obviously Wally West. So he becomes the new Flash. He transcends from Kid Flash into the Flash, just like he did in the comic books. And that's where the trilogy ends. I'm debating whether I should have another hero character in the movie as well, a young character, like a sidekick type character, either Jesse Quick or Impulse, who could take over as the new sorta Kid Flash, the new sidekick to the new Flash. I think that would be very fitting because the previous movie was all about family and about teaming up. So you kinda need that here as well to continue that. So I think it would be a good idea to somehow find a way to fit that in. I think it could be a bit tricky though to fit in yet another origin story, another person gets super speed. But thematically it would fit very well, so it would be good if you could do that. I would probably go with Jessie Quick because we kinda need another female character in there because there are so many male characters in these movies. You have I mean, all the heroes are males, Barry, Wally and Jay, so it would be nice if you had a woman in there as well. I have really no clue how to really include her. I don't really know that much about Jessie Quick from the comic books. I haven't read that many stories with her. So maybe this is actually how it is in the comics, I'm not really sure, but you could make her related to Jay Garrick, maybe be his granddaughter or something. And that's how she comes into the picture. Maybe she is his granddaughter in the comics, I don't really know. But you could do something like that, and that would easily explain why she's there instead of her just being some random character. Of course, how she is also in an accident and gets super speed, that's a bit harder to explain and would be a bit silly, but yeah. And yeah, there you have it. That's my The Flash trilogy. My idea for a Flash movie trilogy. It basically follows the entire career of Barry Allen from start to finish. And also features a lot of other characters from the Flash mythology, Jay Garrick, Wally West, and a lot of villains. Now obviously there were a lot of villains who were excluded because there's just no way to fit them in. An obvious one is Gorilla Grodd, a major Flash villain, but there was just no way to really fit him in with these ideas that I had, unfortunately, because I would really like to have him as well, but I just couldn't really do it. And of course there were a lot of rogues who were excluded, like Heatwave and Captain Boomerang and the Pied Piper, etc. But like I said, I don't want to feature too many villains. I don't want the rogues to be too big of a group because then it becomes a mess. I think 4 is good enough, and I think the characters I chose would be good enough. They would have very different personalities. They would balance off each other very well. Captain Cold would be the cool, collected leader. Lisa would be a bit more unhinged and sinister. The Trickster would be the funny, snarky guy, light-hearted guy. And the Mirror Master would be sort of like the tough, hardened criminal, sort of the scarier guy. Yeah, let me know down in the comments what you think about my idea for a Flash movie trilogy. And also, if you have ideas for a Flash movie trilogy or just one single Flash movie, write that down in the comments as well, and we can discuss different ideas of how to make Flash movies. I think these things can be very interesting because a lot of the time us fans have better ideas than the people actually working on the movies. I mean, just look at what they're actually doing with this weird Flashpoint movie. That's probably the last thing I would ever do. If I were in charge of making Flash movies, I would never really want to do something so weird with all these Batman. I don't know what they're doing. Anyway, I think I've babbled on long enough. I have no idea how long this video is gonna be. Probably 5 hours or something. So I'm gonna cut it here, and as always, remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.